The wind howled through the broken buildings, cold and sharp like tiny knives. Snow didn't fall in flakes. It fell in hard, icy chunks that bounced off the cracked roads. The night sky above the ruined alien district was heavy and dark. Only one small pair of feet made soft sounds against the frozen ground. The feet were small, bare, and purple from the cold. They belonged to a child no older than 6. Her tiny claws curled in pain as she limped beside her mother. The mother walked fast, holding her daughter close to her chest. Her coat was torn, her long hair wet and frozen at the tips. Her breath came out in clouds as she looked at the distant light ahead. One house, just one, had warmth, smoke, and safety. A rare thing in this part of the galaxy, especially for someone like her. A widow with no credits, no food, and no future. She reached the metal door and knocked. Once, twice, 3 times, her fingers shook as she pulled her daughter tighter in her arms. The door creaked open just a little. A man stood there, a human, tall and serious-looking. His eyes moved from the mother's face to the child's feet. He didn't speak, just stared. "Please," the alien widow whispered, her voice cracking. "Just one hot meal for my daughter." She took a breath, swallowed her shame, and added, "I'll be yours tonight, just feed her." For a moment, silence hung in the air like thick smoke. The man's eyes flicked again to the child, whose face was pale and lips blue. Then, without a word, he opened the door wider. Inside it was warm. Too warm for the mother to believe it was real. The floor was clean, wooden, and smooth under her feet. The child gave a soft sigh as heat wrapped around her like a blanket. The human pointed to a seat near the small heater. She sat, holding her child in her lap, rubbing the little girl's feet with both hands, trying to bring back some color. The human said nothing. He walked to a pot, stirred something, poured it into a bowl, and brought it over. He handed the bowl to the child, not the mother. The child hesitated, looked at her mother, who nodded. Then the girl slowly brought the bowl to her lips and drank. It was soup, simple, warm, and full of life. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't stop eating. The mother watched with wide eyes, expecting the man to close the door, lock it, and call her to a room. But he didn't. He just sat across the room. Watching quietly, arms folded, she looked down, guilt and fear rising in her chest. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you helping us?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he got up and fetched a dry blanket, placing it around the child. Then he finally spoke. "You asked for food for her, not for you." His voice was calm but strong. "So she gets fed, she gets warm, and she gets to sleep." The mother lowered her head, unsure what to think. Men, especially alien ones, never helped without a price. Back home they called her damaged, useless, and too old. She had begged before, but no one ever fed the child first. "Eat something," the human said, placing a second bowl near her. She didn't reach for it. Her stomach growled loudly, but she didn't move. "What do you want from me?" she asked softly, her eyes full of worry. "Nothing," the man said, looking her in the eye. "Tonight, I don't want anything from you." He stood up and pointed to a small mat beside the heater. "She can sleep there, you can too," he said. "No one will touch either of you in this house." The widow blinked. Confused, this didn't make sense. Why would a human offer warmth and food for nothing? The child was already falling asleep, the bowl empty in her lap, tiny hands still clutching it. The mother wrapped the blanket tighter, gently laying the girl down. Her eyes stayed on the man the whole time, her body tense, ready to run. But he just walked to the back room and shut the door behind him. No locks clicked, no threats, no words. The fire flickered, casting shadows on the wall. The mother sat beside her daughter, confused, scared. And warm, for the first time in days, she whispered to the sleeping child, "Maybe, just maybe, this time someone has a real heart." Outside, the wind kept screaming, but inside, there was silence, warmth, and a strange kind of hope. The fire crackled softly, filling the small room with a golden glow. The child lay wrapped in the thick blanket, her tiny chest rising and falling slowly. For the first time in days, her sleep was peaceful. Beside her, the alien widow sat frozen, not from the cold, but from confusion. She hadn't eaten yet. Her hands rested on her lap, still dirty from the street. The bowl of soup sat untouched on the floor beside her. Still warm, she looked at it like it was a trick. Her eyes drifted to the closed door where the human had gone. He hadn't asked for her body, hadn't touched her, hadn't even looked at her the way other men did. Why? She reached for the bowl slowly, fingers shaking. The smell hit her nose, simple broth, a hint of spice, and something familiar. It smelled like safety, She took a small sip, then another, and before she realized it, the bowl was empty. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from pain, but from surprise. She hadn't cried like that in years. The door opened softly. The human stepped out, wearing a dark sweater and carrying 2 small towels. He didn't speak, just handed her one and walked over to the child. Kneeling beside the girl, he gently unwrapped her feet. The purple had faded to a deep red, but they still looked raw. The woman tensed, watching him closely. He poured warm water into a bowl, dipped the towel, and began cleaning the child's feet with care. No sudden movements, no rough touches, just patience and focus. Most people, he finally said, voice low, just walk past when they see suffering. The woman blinked, not sure what to say. I've walked past too, he added, squeezing the towel. But not this time. She stared at him, her voice cracking. Why? He looked up, locking eyes with her. Because I have food, fire, and space, he said, and your child was crying louder than the wind. She lowered her head, ashamed. I would have done anything. I was ready to— I know, he interrupted gently, but I don't want that. She swallowed hard. Then what do you want? He stood up, drying his hands. For her to live, he said simply. That's enough for now. The words hung in the air like a warm blanket. No one had ever said such a thing to her. Not since her mate died in the border war. Not when she begged for jobs or when other males offered credits for nights she couldn't afford to refuse. I don't even know your name, she whispered. The man sat down on a wooden chair across the room, stretching his back. Name's Reed, he said. You? She hesitated, then replied softly. Sakira. My daughter's name is Teely. Reed nodded, like those names were already familiar. He poured himself a cup of tea and leaned back, not saying much, just listening to the fire. Sakira looked around, taking in the strange details. The room had old tech, a cracked screen, wires bundled near the window, but also signs of life. Tools neatly stacked, a plant growing in a metal can, and the smell of clean wood. You live alone? She asked. Reed nodded once. Used to be a scout for trade convoys, he said. Now I fix broken things. Engines, heaters, memories. She looked at him, unsure if that last part was a joke, but there was no smile on his face, just calmness, and something she hadn't seen in a long time. Control, not the kind that hurts, but the kind that protects. You can stay tonight, he said suddenly. Tomorrow. You can decide what to do next. Sakira didn't reply. She stared at her sleeping daughter, remembering every door that had shut in her face, every look that judged her body before her words. This was the first warm room, the first bowl of food, the first man who didn't ask to touch her. It felt unreal, but real enough for her to finally lie down next to her daughter. As she closed her eyes, she whispered, "Thank you." Reed didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The fire was answer enough. The soup was answer enough outside. The wind continued to scream through the dead city, but inside the small shelter, hope had taken its first breath, soft, shaky, but alive. The soft glow of morning crept in through the broken window. A faint orange light painted the room. Landing on the sleeping face of the child, her cheeks had color again. Soft pink, returning to where only pale blue had been the night before. Wrapped in warmth, she clutched the edge of the blanket like a treasure. Beside her, Sakira slowly opened her eyes. For a moment, she forgot where she was. No noise, no shouting, no cold floor or sharp hands reaching for her. Only the smell of wood, warmth, and safety. She sat up quickly, worried it had all been a dream. But no, Teely was there, breathing softly, and the fire was still burning low in the stove. Then she saw him, Reed, the human, sitting by the window with a mug in hand. Staring out, he hadn't slept, or if he had, it was only for a few hours. You're awake, he said without turning around. Sakira nodded, brushing hair from her face. I thought, maybe you'd ask me to leave, she said quietly. Reed shrugged. You didn't steal anything, and she's still alive, he replied. Why would I? She didn't answer right away. Her fingers tightened around the corner of the blanket, then she asked, Do you know what they call me out there? Reed looked over his shoulder. No, he said. And I don't care, she blinked. Surprised, most men would have asked. Some would have laughed. Others would have used it to lower her price. But Reed just sipped his drink, calm as always, still. The silence pushed her to speak. Damaged, she said, eyes fixed on the floor. Too weak to work, too old to sell, too soft to fight. She let out a bitter laugh. Even my own kind don't want me anymore. Reed stood and walked to the stove, adding another piece of wood. The fire jumped a little, crackling loudly. "They're wrong," he said finally. "You didn't look weak carrying that girl through the storm." That made her chest tighten. No one had ever said that before. They only saw her as a burden, or worse. "A bargain back on my homeworld," she said, her voice low. "Mothers were honored, protected." Her lips trembled. "Now, we beg for scraps." Reed didn't interrupt, he let her speak. His silence like a steady wall behind her words. "I ran from my husband because he hit her," she whispered. Eyes going to Tilly, he said she cried too much. That she was too loud when she was hungry. Her hands shook as she folded them together. "I begged him, but he—" She stopped, looking away, biting her lip hard enough to bleed. Reed knelt beside the stove, fiddling with the heat setting. Then he asked gently, "How long have you been running?" "Almost a year," she said. "Sometimes I clean floors, sometimes I sell wires or scrap, but when there's no work, I—" She didn't finish that sentence, but the silence spoke it for her. Reed turned to her. "You don't have to run anymore, not today." Her throat tightened. "But tomorrow?" He stood up, brushing ash from his hands. "We'll talk about tomorrow when it comes." Tilly stirred in her sleep, mumbling something softly. Sakura turned to her quickly, checking her forehead. Her cheeks, her breathing, all normal. Relief flooded her heart like warm light. Reed watched something unreadable in his eyes. "You love her more than your own life," he said. Not as a question, but as a fact, Sakura nodded. Tears forming again. "She's all I have left." Reed walked to the corner and picked up a small bag. He pulled out a wrapped ration bar and a sealed bottle of water. He placed them beside her. "For the road," he said. "If you still want to leave." Sakura stared at the items, then at the man. "You're giving me food. And still letting me choose?" He met her eyes. "Always." There was a long pause. Then she asked something quietly, something she had never dared ask before. "Why are you so kind?" Reed's jaw clenched slightly and he looked away. He didn't speak for a moment, then said, "Because once I needed someone to do the same for me. And no one did." The words hit her like a stone in still water. She didn't ask for details, didn't press him. But she saw the truth in his eyes, the same pain, the same loneliness, maybe different stories, but the same scars underneath. She leaned back, eyes still locked on him. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a beggar, a burden or a broken woman. She just felt seen. As the fire danced in the corner, Sakura whispered, "Maybe we were both running." Reed nodded once. "Then maybe it's time we both stopped." The wind was calmer that morning, but the city was still broken. Cold fog sat low, wrapping around steel towers like old ghosts. Shattered windows reflected nothing but gray skies. No birds, no voices, only the distant hum of weak power lines. This part of the galaxy had been forgotten, left to crumble, rot, and survive on its own. Reed zipped up his coat and handed a smaller one to Sakura. It didn't fit her perfectly, but it was warm and clean. He also had a scarf for Tilly, who clung to her mother's hand with wide, curious eyes. They stepped outside. Reed's boots crunched over ice and ash. Sakura kept glancing around, nervous. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Where are we going?" "To the market ruins," Reed said. "There's someone who owes me." They walked past rusted transport wrecks. Some had alien bones still inside. Others had become homes for rats and bugs. Sakura held Tilly close, her fingers trembling even with the coat on. The street signs were faded, some in human script, others in alien languages long forgotten. Finally, they reached a small area where the buildings were still standing, barely. A fire burned in a steel barrel, surrounded by 3 old vendors and a few scavengers. One of the vendors, a thick-necked alien with tusks, glanced at Reed and scowled. "Well, look who crawled out of his hole," the alien said. "Didn't think you were still alive." "Reed, I need boots," Reed replied, calm as ever. "Small size?" "For her?" He pointed at Tilly, who hid behind her mother. The vendor narrowed his eyes, then snorted. "You feeding strays now?" Reed didn't reply, just stared. The vendor looked from Sakura to her daughter, then spit on the ground. "Boots cost scrap," he said. "Or favors." Reed reached into his coat and pulled out a folded metal part, an old sensor chip. Still glowing faint blue, the vendor's eyes widened. "That's worth more than boots," he said slowly. "I know," Reed replied. "But I'm not here to bargain." They exchanged items. The vendor gave a pair of soft-lined boots. clearly salvaged but clean and sturdy. Reed knelt and helped Tilly put them on. She wiggled her toes and smiled for the first time in days. Sakira's throat tightened, watching her daughter bounce gently in the boots. But not everyone at the market was quiet. A group of scavengers nearby had noticed. One of them, a lanky alien with burnt skin, leaned toward his friend and muttered, loud enough for Sakira to hear, "That's the widow from Sector 12. The one who offered herself for soup," the other laughed. "Guess humans are easy to please." Sakira froze, her face burning with shame. Reed stood up slowly, eyes fixed on the two. He didn't raise his voice, didn't step closer, he just said one thing, low and sharp. She offered hope. Not her body. The laughter stopped. The market went quiet. Eyes turned toward them, curious, judgmental. Sakira swallowed hard, expecting Reed to walk away and leave them right there. But instead he gently placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Let's go." They left the market, boots crunching over frost behind them. The whispers started again, but Sakira didn't look back. She was still shaking, but not from cold, from something deeper. Fear mixed with confusion. "Why did you defend me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Reed didn't stop walking. "Because it was the truth," he said. And no one else was going to say it. They reached a quiet alley where an old maintenance cart sat against a wall. Reed opened the back compartment and pulled out a small bag of dried food. "Emergency stash," he said, handing it to her. Sakira stared at the bag, then at him. "You knew they'd say things like that," she said slowly. He nodded. "Doesn't matter, but people will think things about you," she said. Confused, Reed shrugged. "Let them," Tilly giggled, playing with her new boots, making tiny prints in the frost. Sakira sat down on the old cart seat, holding the bag close to her chest. "You keep doing this," she said. "You give without asking. Help without reason." She met his eyes. "Who are you really?" Reed looked up at the gray sky, then down at the child's footprints. "A man who once lost everything because he stayed silent," he said. "Now I speak when it matters." The wind picked up again, colder this time. But Sakira didn't feel it the same way anymore. She looked at her daughter, then at the human beside her. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like prey. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she was being protected. The shelter door creaked closed behind them. Tilly ran ahead, jumping on the soft mat beside the fire. Her boots thumping joyfully against the wooden floor. She spun once, then collapsed into a fit of giggles, pulling off her scarf and shouting, "Mama!" "It's warm again," Sakira smiled, but her eyes were heavy. She stood still in the doorway, holding the dried food bag tightly against her chest. Reed walked past her, calm as always, removing his coat and tossing it over the chair. "Put that in the cabinet," he said, pointing to the bag. "Middle shelf." She obeyed without a word, placing the food next to 2 cans of broth and a cracked water purifier. When she turned back around, he was already by the stove. Stoking the fire again, it was strange. He didn't watch her like the others did, didn't measure her like a purchase, didn't scan her body like a scanner for parts. She stood quietly near the wall, her back straight, fingers trembling. Finally she spoke, voice low. "You've done enough." Reed didn't look up. "That so?" She nodded slowly. "Yes." Then, before the moment slipped away, she added, "I'm ready." He looked up at her, now confused. She took a deep breath and reached for the scarf at her neck. Slowly loosening it, her other hand went to the zipper of the coat. "I'm not ungrateful," she said, eyes full of shame. "I said I'd give myself if you fed her, and you did, so." Reed dropped the fire iron with a loud clang. The sound made Tilly flinch. Hiding her face in the blanket, Sakira froze in place, her heart pounding, but Reed didn't yell, didn't rush toward her. He stepped back from the fire, his face sharp but not angry. "Put that scarf back on," he said calmly. She didn't move, not at first. He stepped closer, but not too close. "I said put it back," he repeated, firmer this time. Sakira swallowed and slowly wrapped the scarf around her neck again. Her hands stiff, her voice cracked. "Why won't you let me repay you?" Reed sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because you're not something to be bought," he said. "You don't owe me anything." "But I offered," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "I told you I would." "I didn't accept," Reed cut in. "I said I'd help your daughter, and I did." He pointed toward Tilly, who was now peeking from under the blanket. "Not for trade," he said softly. "For honor." Sakira's legs gave out, and she sank to her knees on the floor. She covered her face with both hands, her voice shaking. I don't understand, she cried. You feed us, protect us, defend my name, and still ask for nothing. No one is like that. Reed knelt beside her, but he didn't touch her. He placed a small cloth in front of her, dry and clean. Maybe, he said. Maybe not in the places you've been. But I made a promise to myself a long time ago, he continued, that I would never take advantage of someone in pain. Sakira looked up, her eyes red. But how do I trust that? You don't have to, he replied. Just stay warm, stay safe, and watch me keep showing it. She looked at him for a long time, the firelight dancing in her eyes. She had met males who promised safety, but their hands always came with pressure. She had seen kind smiles turn into cruel grins once the doors closed, but Reed, he looked tired, not hungry, lonely, not possessive, wounded, not wicked. Then let me help, she whispered. Let me clean or fix things or work. He raised an eyebrow. You can fix plasma regulators? She actually laughed through her tears, shaking her head. No, she said. But I can cook and sweep and teach her to read. Reed smiled for the first time. Then let's make a deal, he said. You and your daughter stay as long as you want. In return, he added, you help make this place feel like home. Home? She repeated the word like it was foreign. He nodded. This shelter is just walls and fire, he said. Maybe with you two here. It can be more, she looked at Tilly, who had crawled closer, her small hand reaching toward the stove for warmth. The little girl smiled at her mother, eyes full of light. Sakira finally nodded. Yes, she said quietly. Let's try. Reed stood up and offered her a hand, not for pulling her to a bed, but simply to lift her off the floor. She took it, rising to her feet. He looked her in the eye and said one last thing before heading to the kitchen. No more trades, no more debts, just people trying to live better. Sakira stood still, watching him disappear behind the wall. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, she believed it might not be something to fear. It started as a quiet morning. Snowflakes floated down like feathers, soft and slow inside the shelter. Warmth glowed from the fire. The smell of soup filled the air. Tilly was drawing with a broken stylus on a scrap of metal. She hummed softly, her new boots tapping gently under the table. Sakira stirred the pot carefully, her hands steadier than before. Every now and then she glanced at the door, her ears twitching at every sound. But things had been peaceful, too peaceful. That uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. Reed was outside, working on the solar panels that powered his heater and lights. He wiped the frost from the glass, adjusted the wires, and checked the battery storage. Everything seemed fine. Until he noticed it, footsteps in the snow, not his, not hers, fresh ones. He crouched near the edge of the shelter wall and peered across the street. A shadow stood between two crumbling pillars. A tall figure, broad shoulders, sharp movements, and eyes that glowed faint yellow under a heavy hood. The figure stepped forward. Reed didn't move, didn't blink. He knew trouble when he saw it. The door opened behind him. Reed? Sakira called. Lunch is almost... She stopped. Her eyes locked on the figure, and her breath caught in her throat. Her hands went limp, and the cloth she was holding fell to the floor. The man under the hood smirked, revealing crooked fangs and a long scar down his cheek. Well, he growled. Didn't think I'd find you this far out. Reed stepped in front of her, his voice calm. You know him? She didn't answer. Her voice had vanished. Her eyes stared at the man like she was looking at death itself. Tilly peeked out from the doorway, confused. Who's that, Mama? The man grinned wider. Is that my little girl? Reed's eyes narrowed. He turned slightly toward Sakira, who was now frozen in place. Is he lying? Reed asked. Her lips trembled, but she whispered, He's her blood father. Reed's fists clenched. The man laughed, stepping closer. You really thought you could run forever, girl? He glanced at Reed. And what are you, the new buyer? She still sells cheap, I see. That was the last straw. Reed took a step forward, placing himself between the stranger and the door. You should leave, he said quietly. The man snorted. Or what? You'll throw soup at me? I'll throw you through that wall, Reed said. Eyes like steel. I don't care who you are, or what you think she owes. She's mine, the man growled. I marked her under clan law. Reed shook his head. She's not property. The wind picked up. Blowing snow between them, Tilly stepped back into the house, clutching her mother's leg now, eyes wide with fear. Sakira finally found her voice. Please, she said. Just go. You think this human will protect you? The man snapped. He can't stop what's coming. Then he lunged. But not at Reed. He darted toward the door. Aiming to grab the child, Reed was faster. In one swift motion, he tackled the stranger to the ground, the two crashing into the snow. Fists flew, elbows slammed. But Reed fought like a soldier, not with rage, but with precision. The stranger clawed at his face, but Reed ducked, twisted, and slammed his fist into the alien's ribs. Once, twice, until the air left his lungs. Reed stood over him, panting. Try that again, he said. And I will break your legs, the man groaned. Coughing. You think she's worth it? He hissed. Reed stepped back and pointed to the road. You've got 10 seconds, the man scrambled up. Blood in his mouth. This isn't over, he spat. He turned and limped away into the snow, his footsteps disappearing fast. No one spoke for a long moment. Only the wind howled across the silent buildings. Inside the shelter, Sakira held Teely tightly. Shaking, Reed stepped in, wiping blood from his knuckles with a cloth. He didn't speak, just looked at them. Teely ran to him suddenly and hugged his leg. You're not scared of monsters, she said, her voice small. Reed bent down, patting her head gently. No, sweetie, he said. I just hit harder. Sakira looked at him through tears. I thought he'd take her, she whispered. I thought he'd take everything. Reed shook his head. No one takes anything from this house, he said firmly. Not while I'm alive, and in that moment something changed. Not just safety, not just kindness, but trust, real, quiet, and powerful. The snow kept falling, but it felt different now. Not like the sharp biting snow from before. It was quieter, softer. Like the cold itself had been pushed back from the doorway of the small shelter. Inside, the fire crackled steadily, warming not just the air, but something deeper. Sakira sat near the stove, brushing Teely's hair. Her hands moved slowly, gently. She had braided her daughter's hair many times before, but never like this. Not with warmth nearby, not with soup on the table, and not with peace in her chest. Teely kicked her boots happily, looking at the new drawing she had made. A stick figure with big shoulders and wild hair stood beside a small alien girl and her mama. A heart hovered above their heads. She pointed at it and said, That's you, Mama, and me, and Reed. Sakira smiled, her eyes stinging. But she didn't cry. Not this time. These weren't the kind of tears that came from pain. They came from healing. Reed entered from outside. Snow on his shoulders. He dropped a new bag of supplies on the table. It wasn't much, just some tools, dried fruit, and a folded blanket. But to Sakira, it looked like treasure. Everything he brought felt like proof that they were still safe. Still here? You fixed the east panel? She asked softly. He nodded, removing his gloves. More power now, he said. We can keep the heater running all night. Teely looked up with a huge grin. Does that mean we can stay forever? Reed chuckled, scratching his head. Well, maybe not forever, little one, he said, but for as long as you like. Sakira watched him closely. His words were simple, but his eyes carried more than he said. There was a weight behind them, like someone who had lived alone for too long and had finally let something break through. After dinner, they all sat by the fire. Reed gave Teely a small, broken music box he'd repaired using spare parts. It played a soft tune now, quiet and slow. The girl's eyes sparkled like she'd been handed a gift from the stars. She danced in tiny circles to the melody. Humming along, Sakira sat beside Reed, holding a warm cup of tea in both hands. I never thought I'd see her dance again, she whispered. Reed leaned back in the chair, watching the child with a half smile. She's got light in her, he said. Even after all she's been through. Sakira turned her head slightly. Looking at him, you helped bring that light back. He shrugged. Maybe, he said. Or maybe I just gave it room to shine. They sat in silence for a while. No need for big words. No need to explain what had already been felt. Just the sound of fire, soft music, and a little girl's laughter. Then Sakira spoke again, her voice low and unsure. I've been thinking, she said, about leaving. Or staying. Reed raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. I've run for so long, she continued. Every time something felt good, I ran before it could break. Her fingers tightened around the cup. But here, I'm not afraid of breaking. Reed looked at her. Really looked at her, not as a refugee, not as a lost soul, but as a person standing strong in the ruins. You don't have to decide right now, he said gently. She shook her head. I already did. She turned to face him fully. If you'll let me, she said, I want to stay. And not as a guest, she added quickly. I want to help, to build, to clean, to work. To make this shelter a home. He smiled. Not wide, not flashy, but honest. You already started doing that the moment you walked in with her, he said. Pointing at Tilly, Sakira chuckled softly. She's louder than your fire, Reed nodded. She's warmer too. Tilly crawled up into Sakira's lap and yawned, her eyes already half closed. Mama, can we stay with him always? She mumbled. Sakira kissed her forehead, then looked at Reed. He didn't answer with words. He just reached behind his chair, pulled out a folded blanket, and gently placed it over both of them. That was answer enough. As the night grew darker and the stars blinked through the broken window, Reed sat quietly in his chair, his eyes heavy, but his heart no longer hollow. In a galaxy full of battles, betrayals, and broken things, he had found something rare, not treasure, not weapons, not fuel or fortune. He had found family, and in that silent moment, as Sakira rested with her daughter by the fire, Reed made a promise to himself. He would protect them, he would fight for them. He would never let the cold take them again, not because he had to, but because he wanted to.